All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So today we are doing our theater advocacy workshop. This is Mike Daehn. He worked here at Ball State for 16 years. And he, for the sophomores and freshmen that don't know, Mike actually started this major here at Ball State. So I'm going to let him take over and kind of talk a little bit more about him.
Hello, everybody. For those of you that I had in class or that I know in other ways or whatever, it's nice to see you again. So it has been way too long. It's still pandemic year, and me not coming to things on campus just because old people, we have to breathe at our hopes and whatever. Young people do too, but we do even a bit more. For those of you that I haven't met before, it's really exciting seeing that you decided that you're going to go into the most rewarding career that there is in the entire universe. It's what I've been doing my entire life. I was a teacher at a very small Catholic school for 3 years, first of all, then at one of those national powerhouse sorts of schools for a decade. Then I started a school called Renaissance School for the Arts that 3 different schools fed into in the city of Appleton, Wisconsin, in which we kind of did a college education for high school people, and was the principal of that for 4 years. And then Ball State was looking for someone who had a lot of college teaching experience, which I had before I started working at the high school level, and a lot of high school teaching experience to come here and start a theater education major. So we did. And I'm married to an absolutely incredibly talented customer and custom person who, at least for the next 2.5 days, is working down in the costume shop. When Emily Boucher left this year, they called in the veterans. So Carmen Schauger and Patty Daehn were both brought in to help out for a little bit. And yeah. Again, excited that all the people in this room, even if you don't end up teaching in a classroom, that you're involved in some way. I'm assuming you're all dead. I don't know that for sure. That you're all looking to have a tremendous impact on the lives of students in a way that no other subject possibly can. You not only reach their minds, you reach their hearts, you reach their soul, you reach their character, you make a difference. And if my experience is what your experiences are going to be like, then I predict that you will have tremendously successful, rich careers in the future, in which your students will think you're one of the most pivotal people that they have ever met in their lives. Having said all of that, it's a hard gig. It's a hard gig because you work longer hours usually than other teachers. It's a hard gig because you have to have a unique set of skills that you're all developing right now as you're going to school. It's a hard gig because frequently you and your students and your parents understand the absolutely pivotal impact you have on their lives, but perhaps other people in the school may not realize it quite as much, at least during your first jobs. By the time I got to the job that was more the competitive powerhouse sort of school, not only did they realize, they expected that there'd be a tremendous amount of quality in terms of the interactions between the theater teachers and the theater students, and that the shows would all be high quality, and that the parents would all be so proud, and that community people would show up and go, wow, we're really glad that we have a strong theater program at this school. But now in particular, at this particular time, it's tricky for everybody that's in the arts, and in some places even more so for theater people, because what we do usually involves us being really, next to the people that we're talking to, and I don't know, actually being able to see what's on their faces when they're trying to communicate some sort of emotional state, or if they're singing, that we can actually see what their mouth looks like when they're making sound, or doing Shakespeare or heightened language or whatever, which is all really, really tricky right now. And as a result, there's been even more of a tremendous need for people to advocate for the arts, for theater education, for why we should be getting a big chunk of the money that's coming from the federal government into our schools now, rather than simply people who teach math and science. And there are a number of us, in my case, it's been for about the last 12 years, but even in the last couple of years, a number of us who have spent a tremendous amount of time talking to decision makers, those people who have the money or get to decide who gets resources that you need to provide whatever resources we need in order to pull this off. That students, including probably everybody in this room, on the high school level, it might even be a little more traumatic, have just gone through one of the most mentally challenging and emotionally challenging years of their life. And who in the school system is responsible for social emotional learning? We are. So who can help at least cope with the tremendous stresses that have been put on the heads of so many students across the country better than anybody else in the schools? We can. And that means that we need to be sharing that information with those people who get to make decisions. And when you do that, that's known as advocacy. There's advocacy on a number of different levels. On the local level, you're your initial advocate. You're the one who's going to speak up and say, my program needs this, this, and this. This is what my program does. This is what my program does that nobody else does. And this is why we need the things that we need to have. And that's just grassroots advocacy. We're going to go through a number of things in a minute to share some additional information. On the state level, most of the time you might not have to get involved unless you're asking for, again, your piece of the pie, whatever the finances are that are going into your district, that you should get at least some sliver of that pie as well. There's a lot of that going on right now with the ESSER funds across the country, which is the elementary and secondary school relief funds that were part of the American Rescue Act that was passed by the Congress earlier in the Biden administration. And so there is now more money, millions and millions of dollars in every state across the country that's being sent into the schools in a way that lots of people understand exactly how to pull all this money to their areas, and that's something we need to be doing as well. And then there's, like I said, most of the time on the state level, it's just going to be financial things, although in Indiana last year, you did deal with a bill called SB 288. Actually, I dealt with that bill really a lot, SB 288, in which the state government was planning on making theater teachers liable for the shows that you put on in the schools. And all that would have needed to happen in order for you to be sued is that some parent would have been opposed to the subject matter. For example, Laramie Project. Almost Maine, if you included the last scene in Almost Maine, or the scene with the same-sex relationship in Almost Maine, a parent complained, they could then take you to court and sue you. And in the past, it's always been school districts and schools that could be sued, but not individual teachers for doing something that just involved your artistic choices. It took a little bit of effort, but that bill was defeated. And so you're safe. And it's the first time, almost every year that bill does resurface, but it's usually just about library materials. And the Library Association is so good at responding in such powerful ways that usually that doesn't pass any muster as well. But this year it was performances. And when they're doing performances, I don't know, maybe there's a music department somewhere that's doing something that's going out of control. But for the most part, what they were talking about you. So occasionally, there is something on the state level that you need to respond to. On the national level, which is where I spent most of my time, that involves going to Congress and talking to our representatives and senators about all the different programs the National Endowment for the Arts supports, about arts education monies through Title IV monies, Title IV Part A, and things that you don't really need to know about in the beginning. Advocacy workshop, but I'm just saying there's 3 prongs to it. The one that you're going to deal with most often is on the local level or the grassroots level. You're talking to your principal because you need something. You're talking to the school board. You're talking to a superintendent. You're getting a parents group together so that they can advocate with you for something that's really important for your program. Maybe there's something in your program that's unsafe. And safety is usually a button that everybody responds to a little bit more if they think that there's potentially going to be a lawsuit, some sort of litigation because some student might have gotten hurt. So anyway, 3 levels to all of this. This will be available for anybody who wants it. I'll send it to Chelsea or Skylar, and they'll figure out what magic place it needs to go to. But I'm going to fly through this pretty much. And I do have a role-playing thing that I'd like us to be able to do that's pretty simple. And we'll wrap this all up before 8 o'clock, unless you have a slew of questions. And then if some of you need to leave, I can certainly stick around and answer some of those questions. Yes, so you do exist. say that I've been doing advocacy work for a long time. When I was your age, I was doing it for Amnesty International, which is a human rights organization. And then for the last, actually it's been closer to 15 years, I've been doing it for the arts. I was the Americans for the Arts Indiana captain for 7 years. I also actually stepped down this morning from the ETA Advocacy Leadership Network. I've been part of their leadership team. I was a founding member of that. And then for the last about a year, I've been in their leadership team, and here I'm moving to Wisconsin later this semester. So my wife, sweet, adorable, amazing, and she would like me to maybe focus a little bit more on packing up my house and saving the world with your education. So once we get to Wisconsin and we're back in the house again, maybe that will change. But for yeah, not sad. Anyway, I've done really a lot of advocacy work for a long time. This is pretty much the spectrum. I mean, these are the things that you can do as an advocate. You can educate. You need to research for every ask that you're making. We'll talk more about asks in a second, because you need to have data. Nobody makes a decision based on simply what you want. If there isn't data that shows that what you want is a positive thing and it's a useful thing, then they'll just go, well, it was very nice talking to you, and I know I don't have anything to do for you today. You can't even see my smile. I'm wearing a mask. I mean, you're looking at me right now going, I know Michael Daehn's smile, and it was big right then, and you couldn't see it because I'm wearing this picture. All right, moving on. Coalition and relationship building, simply figuring out who it is that's on your team, or bringing a whole lot of voices to the table that might be interested in your message. Media outreach and PR, anytime that you invite school board members, we used to bring school board members to all of our musicals and feed them spaghetti before opening night. So there was a big spaghetti dinner, they were all there, they all saw the show afterwards, they got to listen to go, oh, that was so good. But they had a really good night. And so when they thought about Appleton West Theater, a smile came on their face, which is what you want to have happen. Anytime you write a letter to the editor or write a letter to anybody, pitching your program in some way, or the merits and the pluses of students who take arts education or theater education, it's their organizing. This is kind of the key here. It says nonpartisan voter engagement. Whatever you do as a advocate has to be nonpartisan. Whatever my politics are when I go to visit senators and representatives from Indiana and Washington, doesn't make any difference. Everybody's a fan of the arts. In fact, frequently I would walk into Republican senators' offices and just say to them, hi, I am the bright ray of sunshine that's coming into your room today, because I'm not here to talk about healthcare. I'm not here to talk about foreign policy. I'm here to talk about something that I know you already love, the arts. Now, sometimes with some representatives, some parties tend to want to fund the arts more than some other parties, but that just means that I need to find the right buttons to push if I want people that are already a little predisposed against my message to buy into my message. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. And then lobbying, which is most of what I'm talking about when I head out to talk to representatives. I want them to think that the stand I'm taking on a particular issue is a stand that makes a lot of sense to them too, for whatever their motivations are. They might not be the same motivations I have, so that they can support me. So that's the advocacy spectrum. All right, so what you're doing is you're formulating something called an ask. And again, the who, how, what, why, you can move on to the next slide. What an ask is a well-prepared specific request. It's made by an advocate to a decision maker or a policy maker, what we call stakeholders. And then it focuses on an important want or need. It should be focused enough that I'm not going to walk into anybody's office with a big long list, laundry list of things. 2 or 3 really important things that I think are achievable, and that I have the right sort of information in order to make a case to somebody that we can have those things. Requires careful preparation and sufficient practice. I know that anytime any of you guys audition for a show, and even if you're not auditioning for shows anymore when you were here, chances are a bunch of you, except for those of you with a technical perspective, that you did at some point or another in your life. When we're preparing for a show, we practice our monologues over and over and over. We're willing to look like crazy people walking down the street talking to ourselves. I know, because I did this many times myself. I'm not even saying like anything in terms of mental health type things. I'm just saying people that other people would look at and go, that's very unusual that that man is talking to himself. And I was practicing monologues, as you've probably done. need to do the same thing if you're going to go in and speak to somebody about what it is that you want. You did it as kids. When you were talking to your parents about things that were really, really important to you, didn't you think ahead of time about which arguments were probably the best arguments? Which arguments, aren't going to work at all? Which arguments, I might actually get what I want if I use this argument because I know that's Mom's button. And then she'll push back on Dad. It's the same thing. So before I go in to speak to someone, I know that I have to spend some time making sure that I sound smooth, that I know my stuff, that I have a decent chance of getting what I want. I practice before I go in. Doesn't mean I'm not flexible on my feet if something else is thrown at me that I didn't expect, or that I'm not prepared enough that I can deal with almost anything. But why wouldn't you want your spiel to be as good as your spiel could be? I use the word spiel, I think, since education. All right, moving on. How to craft your ask. First, what's the issue? Again, very specific. Rather than something that's general, like we would like you to support theater education. Yeah, okay, I support theater education. What does that mean? We would like there to be new curtains. We would like to be able to bring in a safety inspector to check those curtains. We would like there to be a CTE program that revolves around the technical part of our high school theater experience right now, where people can get certified technical education credit for being part of theater. Something that's very specific. We think that of the $10 million that our school district is getting from the ESSER funds, that 500,000 of those should go to the arts. And this is where we would like them to be divided up. I sat down with my music friends, I sat down with my visual arts friends, and this is how we want that money divided, and this is why. So I need to know what very specifically is the issue. Who has the ability to solve the problem or address the need? If you want another theater class added to your school, you don't go to the principal for that because your principal can't add any classes to your school at all. You have to go to the district's curriculum director or whoever handles curriculum in your school. So you need to know who can actually solve this problem for you. Who shares your need? I know that if I go in and I'm making a case for that CTE, that technical education thing that I was talking about, but the entire industrial arts part of my high school is probably on the same side that I am, and I want them there at the table arguing with me that kids from their area who might now dabble in our area, and kids from our area who might now dabble in their area, that lots of people are going to benefit from this choice if they in fact decide to create a CTE program in theater. What's your timeline for action? What resources do you need? And then what's the end result? Everything that you do as an advocate needs to be measurable. I need to know whether I was successful or not. So if in fact I don't know exactly what I want, I guess I could rationalize that everything I do is successful, but that may not be the best approach in terms of what it is that you really want. Okay, moving on. It requires a two-pronged approach. One is the quantitative power of data. I need to have reports or studies or statistics that I go in and I say, well, it's been proven, and I share things like, the arts are one of the most powerful tools for shaping a sense of community identity, pride, and placemaking. And I tell them where that came from, what the study is that shared that. Schools with high levels of engagement in the arts have less dropouts, higher academic achievement rates, more collaborative thinking, higher levels of creativity, and higher levels of empathy. And they're all the skills that the Fortune 500 CEOs have put the most stock on for the future. That's what they want in their future workers. That's what you train. That's what you do. That's what you create. That's who your students are. So I want to have data and explain where the studies are, and then I'm going to leave them copies of these studies so that they can refer back to them when they're talking to their colleagues about what tremendous points I made with the data that I had. But at the same time, we're all theater people. Data, even for the golds in the room, for those of you that know true colors, data's a little dry. Data doesn't, kick me in the butt and says, go do something. Data just gives me the goo that I need in order to show them that statistically people have said that what I've said is accurate and true. What you need on top of that is you need the empathy-inducing power of stories. So regularly when I go in and I talk about the PRISM project, don't know if any of you are familiar with the Prism Project. I started that also with Brian Kerrigan, I don't know, a bunch of years ago, 11, 12 years ago, where we worked with students on the autism spectrum. And I did it for 7 years, and then we ended up having 2 people in the department here who actually have degrees in working with people that have challenges or that are on the spectrum. So it made a whole lot more sense for them to do it instead of just some guy from Sheboygan, Wisconsin, who thought people on the autism spectrum were awesome. Anyway, I regularly tell the story about how the first year of Prism Project, there was a young man named Noah Fisher who, the first week, he came in. Noah was on the spectrum. He was also blind. And he walked over to the organ with a little bit of help. And he sat down at the organ and he popped his head down on the organ and he decided he wasn't going to talk to anybody. And me thinking that I could break through anybody's boundaries in order to go talk to Noah, I went over and I started to talk to him, and his head, which had been turned this way looking at me, he just flipped it around the other way. 10 weeks later, Noah sang a solo to his mom on stage. It's not easy being green. And there wasn't a dry eye in the entire audience. And again, when I go to talk to a senator, I explain to them first the data of how the arts help people who are dealing with life challenges, such as being on the spectrum. And then secondly, I tell them the story of Noah. So I tell them the story of the other little girl, I can't remember her name from that first year, who the first day she came up to me and she had a little stuffed dog. And she wouldn't talk to me, but the stuffed dog did. And by the time the show opened, the same show that Noah sang his solo, she went on stage with her dog. I was the MC at that time. It used to be that the kids in the show did the MC, and that's I think it's a good thing that they're doing it now, but I'm just saying for the first 6 or 7 years, it was me. I'm writing the script and doing all sorts of things. But anyway, by the time we got to the show, she went on the stage with a little dog and she ran out to join the entire group. And then she ran back over to me at the podium and handed me her dog and said, "Will you take care of him?" And then she ran back out and joined the rest of the group and grabbed the dog on the way back. So the growth that we see in these students is phenomenal. And I have to be able to, in a very quick way, without much time, most of the time we get 20, 25 minutes if we're talking to a senator or a rep, I have to be able to communicate to them the data that says it's true and the power of what it does, which you all know because you work in computer education. All right, anyway, so we combine those 2 things together, and then we also make sure that our audience, if I'm talking to a senator or whatever, he's my audience, has a copy, a very specific copy of what it is I'm asking for in my ask. Let's keep on going. Who's your audience? Knowing who to ask is just as important as knowing what you are asking for. Well, that's weird. And this man used to be a college professor. Don't notice the grammatical mistake there. I fixed it, the top line before I came here before, and I fixed it wrong. If your ask is about funding, who controls that funding? If your ask is about facilities, who's in charge of the facility operation? If your ask is about curriculum, who's in charge of that? If your ask is about rules within a school, or whether you can stay later for rehearsals, or you can rehearse on weekends or whatever, yes, the principal does make those decisions. So you just have to know who you're talking to. Additional ask tips, be polite. Nobody likes an asshole. So if you go in and you decide that you're all full of yourself, and you're going to be in somebody's face, that's great. I hope you get a lot of color out of that experience because you're not going to get what you wanted as part of your ask, and you're not going to be asked back either. Know your stuff. When you come in, you're expected to be the expert. They're looking at you as the expert. What most decision makers do is they have to deal with everybody under their umbrella control in a way that they assume each person knows their area well enough that when it comes time for there to be questions about their areas, they can ask you or you will come to them. You have to know your stuff and make them confident that you really do. Don't muddy the water with non-asked subjects. There used to be a gentleman here that was in charge of immersive learning on campus for a long time. When I went to Washington one year, he was just sort of there. He was there because of the, I think the National Humanities Endowment or something, but he decided he was going to pop in and help us with our arts advocacy as well. And we went in to talk to Senator Braun, and instead of him talking about the arts, he spent the entire time talking about how upset he was about the attacks on Obamacare. And needless to say, our 25-minute appointment was turned into a 12-minute appointment, and we accomplished absolutely nothing. So you talk about just those things you're supposed to talk about. And again, why bring up anything that might put you on the opponent's side of someone you're speaking with when you want their help with the thing that you want? All right, and then finally, stay positive and like them. It kind of goes back to the nobody wants to do anything without us. Follow up with a thank you message, an email or a card. Right here. Actually have postcards that I had printed up. They're kind of fun. They're specific to us here. So whenever they would get one of these in the mail, they would know that, oh, that Daehn guy from Muncie, Indiana here talking to us about the arts. In addition to that, you always leave a leave behind, which means you leave a folder or copies of specifically what your ask is. And this is even if you're talking to the principal. It might just be an email that you printed or whatever, but whatever it is that you specifically want, you need to leave that with them so that 5 minutes after your meeting, they're not fuzzy about what it was that you were asking for. And then frequently, if you can come up with something special as a leave behind. So for example, our representative here in Muncie is the former vice president's brother. Greg Pence is our representative. And the first time that I went to see him, I noticed there was a mint bowl on his table, and that makes sense. Politicians have to talk a lot, so they might have good breath, whatever. So the second time that I went to see him, I brought little Bob Ross mints in a little metal container. And not only did he absolutely love the fact that I thought of bringing him something different, but he took the container after the mints were done and added it to a display that he keeps in his office of old Muncie and area things. So that now every time he looks at that container, he thinks of a conversation about the arts that we had. So, I mean, a lot of times music organizations or whatever, they'll come up with calendars each year or some sort of writing instrument or something that the person you're talking to, the stakeholder, the decision maker, will see frequently. Okay? And then if you promise them any additional information at all, just make sure they get it within a couple of days. It's perfectly fine if they ask you a question and you don't know the answer to that question, even if it's your principal. To say, I'm not sure, but I'll have that information for you tomorrow or the next day. And whenever you tell them you'll have it to them by, have it to them by that day. So that they also know that you're someone that's dependable and can count on. Okay, doesn't do the advocacy, know your facts and figures. Have your own story. I just told you 2 stories that were part of my story with the prison project. I could tell you hundreds from my years as a high school teacher and director. Make your pitch personal to your audience. Whenever I go talk to Senator Todd Young, he's a highly decorated military veteran. The only way that he's going to be interested in passing the budget for the National Endowment for the Arts is if I can tie it in some way to military service. And because they have a program called Creative Forces, which promotes using the arts to deal with people who have come back from combat zones with PTSD, that is always where Sally Gaskell, who's the other statewide advocate in the state of Indiana, that's always where she and I would hit when we would talk to him because we knew that it would work. And by the time we were done talking with him, he, in every single case, said, I think that program's amazing. And yes, I will support the funding of the National Endowment for the Arts, even though we may want it for lots of other reasons in addition. I have nothing against the Creative Forces program, it's a great program. All right, so know your audience also. And this happens even in your districts. You're going to talk to the school board. Well, before I go to that meeting where we're all going to bring lots of our high school students along, and they're going to sing, they're going to talk about how important theater was, and preferably they're going to do this before you're in a crisis situation rather than after you're in a crisis situation. It doesn't hurt at all to try to get on the school board docket just so your high school kids can say something positive about their program. But before I do this, before I meet with the school board, I'm at least going to try, and I might not be completely successful, but I'm going to try to do a little research on these people who are on the school board. Which of them have kids? Which of those kids are in orchestra, or band, or like the visual arts, or took dance when they were a kid? Did these school board members themselves have any experience in the arts back when they were in school? Do they know what it is that pushes our buttons in such a good way? And if they do, then you're going to talk about that a little bit before you go in and you make your ask. You're going to say, yeah, I heard that when you were in high school, you played the role of Lola in Daehn Yankees. Whatever Lola wants. Yeah, that is so audition for that. And if I have that sort of information, which is actually true about Senator Mike Brown, his wife did play Lola in Daehn Yankees when she was in high school. Mike Brown was in the chorus for My Fair Lady. He knows a tiny bit about the theater, not a lot, but anything that makes it feel like you're operating on some sort of light ground can only help you. So find out who your audience is before you start speaking to them. Know exactly what you want. Have a core message in a 30-second pitch. We call this an elevator speech. And an elevator speech, the last time I was in Washington, I was headed to a breakfast with Senator Young and Senator Brown. And as I walked in the building, I looked to my right and there was Senator Brown. And he went, I don't know exactly where I'm going, because it's a different building than we usually meet in. I said, I'll show you. So the two of us went to the elevator together, and I had him for 4 floors of unrequited advocacy, in which I could say anything I wanted to him at all during that limited time that we had together. And so by the time I actually got into the room where I was going to speaking to him more, I already made my pitch. And now I just had to flesh it out even a little bit more when I was in the room with it. Be respectful of your audience and their time. I don't guess anything more. I don't understand that. Persuade, don't argue. You know, again, we sometimes do that in all aspects of our lives, where we really, really want something and it makes us feel so enraged that we're not getting it, that actually what we're doing is pushing the other side farther away. We just need to come up with arguments that speak to them, even though they may not be the same arguments that speak to us. Be prepared for pushback. Yeah, they have so many people that are competing for limited resources. I mean, if there's a certain pool of money, this is a zero-sum game. We can all win a little bit of something, but we have to make the case that we are just as deserving as everybody else who's asking for those funds, or for their attention, or for the school resources, or for whatever. Well, the music department really needs, yes, but we really need it too. We need the stage all the time for our rehearsals. So the music people should only get it a couple of days before their actual concert, and then explain to them why. Or invite the principal in to watch your rehearsal so they actually know what it is that you do. I know sometimes we freak out on that because they see it when we do something wrong. What if they don't? What if they see that some kid said some word they're not supposed to say, and instead of us screaming at them, we just kind of like, it's not that big a deal. And then we moved on with we don't want that to happen. But the other part of that conversation is that they don't see what you do. They at first we had a principal a number of years back. For any of you who work over at Burris, we're always good people and they're always nice people. We have had a track record in the 17 years that I've been around here, most of the time, occasionally for a musical, but otherwise, most of the time, the administrators don't show up for your show. We had a principal for 2 years whose daughter was in the play, and they lived in Indianapolis, and she had to drive her daughter home every day. Her name was Kathleen Dara. So she sat in the audience and watched her daughter rehearse every single day, and it was amazing. The new things that we started to get because they understood what it is that every one of you does when you're telling stories with their kids, and how hard their kids were working, and maybe harder than anybody else in sports or whatever they might be working in. All right, anyway, moving on. So, part of what you're doing as an advocate is developing a long-term relationship. You may not get what you want really quickly. It may take you months, it may take you years. But an advocacy visit is never wasted because it is a part of the evolution of your relationship with that person. If nothing else, even when they're saying no, you're figuring out which arguments not to use again. Or you're maybe figuring out what they seem to value that you can use in the future. So again, if it doesn't happen initially, you just keep trying and you keep developing that long-term relationship. I'll leave something behind we've already talked about, both in terms of data and maybe something that they'll just sort of smile at, like that little mint container and go, yeah, I like that guy with the long beard, he's great. And then after you're done, be reflective. Just like you are as directors, after you're done directing your show, you go, what worked, what didn't work? What do I need to do in order to make it work even a little bit better the next time around? Which you'll be doing your entire career. A lot of you do that in terms of reflective teaching after you're done with the lesson, what worked, what didn't work. Same thing with advocacy. You know, what works, what doesn't work. And then make adjustments so that it works better. Make that go away. We're almost done. All right, these are the questions every theater educator or advocator should ask of themselves. What's the value of theater education in your community? what does theater education do better than anything else in your community? And there are a number of things that it does, no matter where you're teaching or how big your program is. How would your community be damaged if there were no theater programs? And how can I optimally structure my theater program to maximize student learning and demonstrate the irrefutable value of theater education to the community? Because we are. All right, moving on. Yeah, additional resources. So now when you need some of this data, here's some places that you can find them. These are live links. Why don't you click on it first, a second, please? You all know what the EDTA is? It's the Educational Theater Association. They are responsible for thespian programs that they have at lots of schools around the country. There's 150,000 members in EDTA, so it is a huge force for everything that you want to do. And I believe that all of you are eligible for free pre-professional memberships. And I am teaching an online class here later in the semester that Skylar and Chelsea are TAing for. I will pass on the information through them on who you need to contact in order to sign up if that is something you wanted to do. All right. Actually, if you go on this page, they're going to let you sign up for something right there at least. Let's go to the Rapid Response Advocacy Center. Okay, so if you have questions about advocacy, right now I was talking about the Elementary and Secondary Education Relief Act. They always are up to date in terms of what the key advocacy issues are right now, if you go to this page. Moving right along. Okay, down here, Arts or Education, which is going to be the next slide, is a national campaign to promote the arts. And one of the wisest people in the entire country, a man named Jim Pomerini, is setting up the theater education part of that. We're in good shape in terms of what's happened this year to make us visible. EDTA Advocacy Toolbox, I know I have a bunch of articles in there. You don't need to go there, but I'm just saying, this page here, which was the Rapid Advocacy Response link on the advocacy link of the edta.org page. Every year in March, we have a Theater in Our Schools month in which we advocate for an entire month for our programs. That has resources from last year's TIOS program. Go to the next one. This was started this year primarily because we were concerned with what sort of impact COVID was going to have on high schools around the country. So it's the Arts Our Education campaign. Again, there are more resources there as well. Can you jump to the next slide? So there's a pledge that I believe over 100,000 people and schools and cities have signed so far supporting theater education. There's specific letters they ask you to send in terms of advocacy, a school board resolution getting school boards to say that theater education is an important part of their community, and then they also have an advocacy toolbox as well. So again, all of these will be available to you, and I would recommend that you at least play around a little bit. If I were still here in 396 class, there was an entire month when we did nothing but advocacy work. But I'm not. So this is the best that I can do. All right, moving on. And then this is the last slide here. Just in terms of high school ideas, adapt your marketing to serve your advocacy needs. Every time you put out a program, EDTA prepares certain ads that are, did you know? And then there's some stupendous fact about theater education and what it does and the number of people that are impacted. And there's a whole wave of them that I put one of those in every program I have. Same thing with if you have websites. Not only do you promote things that your program is doing advocacy-wise, but there's lots of national things you can put in there in order to teach your audience. Because that's what you are, you're educators. You need to educate your audience as well as your students. Create a database of student achievement. You want people to know that people who are in the theater do absolutely amazing things and wonderful things. And how could they possibly do all that and spend all the time they do in rehearsals and shows and whatever, but they do. So, and you want that to be readily available if somebody should have any questions about the value of your program. Well, let me show you what our students do. Do a community economic impact survey. One of the best websites for people who are interested in advocacy work is the Americans for the Arts webpage. I think it's just AmericansForTheArts.org. And one of the things they have is they have an economic impact statement where you can determine how much money is brought into your community every time you do a show. In terms of even just parking, ticket prices, restaurants before the show if they go out to get something to eat. I mean, it's some huge number that people usually freak out when they go, wow, every person who goes to a show spends about that much money. So that you have, a lot of times, in some people's minds, money is the top priority. So if you can prove that you contribute to the creative economy with your shows, then you have more power. You have more leverage with the people that you're talking to. You want to talk to them in their language, and in a lot of people's language, money talks. So, do a community economic impact survey for your particular program. Become knowledgeable about any new research that comes out that says something positive about the impact of the arts on students. And then share that, even if it's just a letter to the editor or something that's put into your program or whatever about any new study that's come out. Invitations, performances, and activities, and testing meetings, and that can be anybody from parents, principals, teachers, superintendents, school board members, local, state, national representatives. Whenever our local representative, congressional representative was home, and we were doing a show at the same time, we would invite him, and even though he belonged to a party that I usually don't vote for, I would make sure that before the show started, he got to stand up and wave to people in the audience. And our audience was very polite. I don't know if that still works today, because I know today people are a little more protective. But even the people who didn't vote for him or her always clapped. All right, and then finally, create and update a frequently asked question handout about your program. You don't want to wait until there's a crisis in order to do something. You want that to happen ahead of time. Okay, and we're moving on. Advocacy role play, elevator speeches. I don't know how many people are here, but I'm kind of hoping it's under 25. Because the Lorax always cuts me up to 25. I'm not allowed to print things out more than that, or I have to plan.
Say there's 16,
But
17.
the elevator operator? You'll always do my
Because I
elevator.
already tallied it up and forgot. 17, 18, 19, 20.
I think we're only gonna make it through the first role play that I want to do, because I talked too much and that's that. With any extras? Oh, sorry. I'm gonna take one. Okay, there's several things in this packet, but the biggest reason I gave you a packet is to have data. So the first couple of pages, 10 reasons to support the arts. On the other side, what Americans believe about the arts. And then quick facts about theater education. And the next page, facts you can use. That's all data. So, kind of like that character on Star Trek, The Next Generation. All data. What I put on the last page, or the last 2 pages, just that might be useful to you, are just some of the questions that you're coming up with an ask that you should be asking yourself, and reminders that it needs to be both data and stories. And then the last page is a letter I wrote from Noblesville High School when they had me do a workshop there a couple of years ago. They wanted to say, well, what type of letter could I send to a senator or representative if there isn't a specific issue right now that we should be dealing with? So there's also a letter there simply for your own benefit. So these packets are yours. And the only thing I would ask is, because I don't have copy privileges here or whatever anymore, I copy these on my printer at home. And the saddest thing when somebody comes in to do a workshop is when they're leaving the room and I just see them all deposited over on the side of the room. So don't do that. Even if you recycle them somewhere else, and you recycle it, you're gonna get rid of them. Do that after I'm no longer around and I don't see that all of my hard work went through. That man talks a lot. I don't want this paper anymore. Okay, let's shut that dude off. Okay, so what I'd like you to do during our last 10 minutes here together is pair up with somebody in the room. And if there's 3 people in a group, it's not going to mess anything up.
Yes.
Okay, before you deal with the other person, I mean, you're fine. I have no trouble with you holding hands or whatever, that's all. More people in the group. So, I do this my all right, anyway. So, I'd like you both to look at the data. You're just going to skim it, obviously. And you're going to prepare a 30-second to a minute elevator speech and the other person in your dyad, when you have two people, it's just a dyad. So you're about to have a dyadic encounter. Yes, I still do that bad joke. I'm sorry for all of you who are older people. Oh, it's going to be a dyadic encounter now. It always sounds dirtier than it is. All right, moving on. And now let's see the word dirty. So, what I'd like you to do is consider who the other person could be as a decision maker or a stakeholder in which you're going to share your 30 seconds or a minute worth of a little bit of data and a little bit of a story for a reason. Now, it doesn't have to be a specific reason like I want new curtains for my school. It could simply be, I know that you're voting on the NEA budget, some of which is going to go to arts education. Let me tell you about theater education. It could be something very general. It doesn't have to be something real specific, but there still has to be some reason that you're talking to this person. And so, if I'm pretending the two of you are together. And you are, okay, so I'm completely pretending. So, once you know what it is that you're going to do during your 30-second elevator speech, you're assuming the role temporarily of whoever that person is. I know that I'm over-explaining this. You're assuming the role of whoever that person is that she's going to talk to, and then you're going to flip. After you're done with your elevator speech, then you're going to do the same thing back to Catherine, but with Catherine being whoever it is that you want. That make sense? Okay, so Catherine. You're not going to use all that data. I just wanted to make it obvious. So it might be you use one thing or two things. You certainly could.
30 seconds.
Good luck with that. I'm rooting for you. Remember, whatever arguments you use, they have to land. So if you just spout off 30 things, I don't know if anything's going to land. They have to land.
Right now we're in fire safety. So we've been trying to get donations. You can do that.
When you are both done, just take it down to a non-existent roar again. But keep going if you're not done. Keep going. Sorry. But when you're both done, bring it all the way down. In that case, we're going to read. Yes, I am watching you. Let's bring you all back. Everybody at least got a flavor. The last time that I talked to one of the more conservative representatives that we have from the state of Indiana, Washington, this was all I said to him. Well, the reason I want you to support the arts is because the arts drive our economy. They contribute $764 billion to our gross domestic product. They create 4.9 million jobs, and we have a $21 billion trade surplus in the arts. We make more money for our country each year than forestry, transportation, and agriculture. I think we deserve a seat at the table. That was my elevator. So again, the more you practice, the easier this gets. We don't have time for this scenario, but I want to share it with you at least because this is more likely what you might be dealing with. A parent of one of your most dedicated performance students has removed that student from the acting class and forced him or her to enroll in calculus instead. The student has requested that you meet the parent in hopes you will be able to persuade him or her why the student should stay in the acting class. That's advocacy. If you are looking for more data, Americans for the Arts puts out a book for their Arts Advocacy Day, which is also on their website, and it shares every key bill that deals with any of the arts at all on the site, along with specific asks, along with lots of charts that have data that you can use in order to make your case. That's again again, AmericansForTheArts.org. The Indiana Arts Commission also has a book they put out each year that has all the information about Indiana data. They also have a one-sheeter if a book is a little bit too cumbersome for you to make it all the way through. And then these are examples of those ads I was talking about, the Did You Knows, that each have a, like an outstanding statistic of some sort that I used to run in my programs. They're all free in different sizes on the EDTA website, and you just download them and use them to your little heart's desire. And then we also have another advocacy group in this area. It's started by music people. They're starting to let us have a little more impact, and that's the Indiana Arts Education Network. And the Indiana Thespians just became a member of that group last year. I worked with them a few years in terms of creating a state advocacy day down at the State House here. We did have a proclamation that was passed to make the entire day Arts Advocacy Day for the state of Indiana, which was kind of cool. And all the representatives and senators at the State House all got up and gave all the arts teachers that were there standing ovations, so they at least know what we do, and they know that we made some sort of positive impact. But so there's devices for you to find all of the data you need. It's all over the place. I mean, it's all over the place in 5 or 6 predefined areas that you will be able to find that. You need to think of your stories. You need to think of what the best ways to make your case are. You need to figure out who your audience is so that you can make the best arguments in a way that is going to probably bring you the most success. And I'm going to wrap it up because I said I'd be done at 8 o'clock, but I have no life anymore, really. So I wanted to stay here for 15 minutes if anybody has questions. But if you, being industrious students that need to like do homework or something, need to head out, I understand that completely. They may have messages.